jump into Nasser, I mean, you touched a lot of interesting things. I want to come back to you so you can think about it. You mentioned the opposition party, and I have it in here already. What they really need to do, not right, just come and speak and leave. I'll leave it there. I want to jump back to you, Nasser. Nasser, here's the interesting thing. There's this assumption, a lot of I wanted to say actually kind of contradiction because a lot of immigrants, including the Oromos, we tend to be more of conservative. We are more Republican in terms of religion, but then in terms of I don't know how we are more Democrat, but somehow the Democrat is perceived as a party of the immigrant, the poor, and for women. That's how it's perceived. I mean, what is you understand? Like, how should Oromo take part in election? One, in the U.S. having Democrat and Republican, one of our challenges is that we don't reach out to Republicans. We go only with Democrats. But then one thing we do know, and myself, is that Democrats have taken advantage of immigrants, African American women, and poor people, really taking their vote, but really not doing anything. So I want you to say something about that, but I also want to go back to earlier what you say. So we mostly take part, a lot of our activism we do here in diaspora in Minnesota, for example, the state you are in, is mainly in what the issue that is back home. But we really need to kind of touch back. How can young people who are coming up, who grew up here, who know the system, why are they not connected to the American system like yourself? Like, I've been part of a lot of organizations, non-Oromo organizations. Why is that like, even though we are very educated compared to other communities, we're not any less educated compared to Somalians, compared to the Habeshas or any other, but yet there's this huge gap that Oromos in the Americas or even other places, I don't really see them being taking part in the election process or in the system, whatever country they are in.
Well, thank you. I think you touched on a lot of important points because there are a few reasons why we're not getting involved. One is that lack of trust. Lack of trust is like a really huge issue, specifically among people of color. That includes Oromo, African American, Latino, Asian as well. So lack of trust in government is like a really, really very low among immigrant groups in the U.S., and that also depends on where you came from. If you came from a place that is, government is being seen as, a dictator or as oppressive government, you are more likely to have a high distrust of government in the U.S. There's a survey about this actually that we did in 2014, 2015, somewhere, I think 2016 or somewhere like back in, I don't remember exactly the year, but we kind of really talked to or did a short survey around specifically with the focus on Oromos who are living at the City Riverside neighborhood in the city of Minneapolis. That's what a very sizable Oromo population are living to this day. And we asked them, like, how do you navigate the city? Do you trust the government? Like 80% of them said, we don't know how to navigate and we don't really trust government and we would rather be like, stay out of it, kind of. So if there's no effort to build the bridge between government and the community, that is, you will find always people not involving, because if that trust does not, if the trust issue is not addressed, it's not being addressed, people don't really feel comfortable getting involved in government and like participating in the process of making place or in the process of making democracy work. The U.S. democracy is oldest democracy, one of the oldest democracies, but it might die because if people don't participate in the democracy always die because it relies on people. It makes better by people's participation, and it's not like a soccer game because soccer game the audience sit there watch and whoever scored the goal you happy about it, whatever, or you sad about it. But democracy is a game for everyone that you just like get in as you are, whether you are, a citizen or whether you are not non-citizen or whether you are immigrant or whether you're white or black. There's always a space for you. There's always a place for you where you can like jump in and play a role. But I also want to talk about a little bit the the system that Democrat and Republican. Well, obviously, Democrats are being seen as the party of immigrants, the party of liberal or progressive, that kind of stuff. To a certain extent, that is very true. But I think our people, the immigrants specifically, I'm talking about like the Oromo people, we have to like make sure that we have our own values, not the Democratic Party value, not the. There are some of our values that reflect both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican. But the question is, how do we, like as a community, as a society, how do we make sure that our values are known? If we don't get involved, there's no way that we can tell our value. Here's what we value. Here's what we care. Here's what we really want us to be done. And it doesn't matter who will be like really pick up those issues and like push it forward. And it could be Republican, it could be Democrat, depending on what is like really being addressed, and depending on how we vote. Do we vote by by a huge number, or do we just vote like once in a while in like maybe 10 years, maybe in 8 years, or whatever? Politicians always watch for where the votes come from. They can't ignore the communities that vote often and that vote a lot by a lot numbers. It doesn't matter, like, if you don't get involved, your voice, it doesn't exist. Your voice doesn't exist. But if you really involve and organize yourself, and also like, not only organize, but having consistency. That's what matters the most. Having consistency around like the issues that you care, which is advocacy. What do you advocate for? What are your issues? What do you care? What do you want to be addressed in your community? And also, is this just the issue that you just want to talk about it as a pleasure and walk away from it, and then maybe come back after 4 years? Or is it the issue that you want to make sure that this is part of the family conversation, part of the community conversation, part of every Oromo conversation? Or is that just like that, that we just talk? Or is it really something that you want to push it consistently and insist on making sure that anyone, whether the person who's elected is white or black, is focused on addressing those issues? There's always complaint about, communities of color voting, but the Democrats or the Republicans never come back to them and do anything. But I think as long as consistency is there, there's always politicians who want to come back and do this thing, because they always need your vote. And they always say, vote for us. When they get your vote, they never come back, because there's no consistency. But if there's consistency, they always be careful, because if you look at the, rich neighborhood, white rich neighborhood, the issues are addressed, consistently. And that is what we need to do as Oromo, and that is what we really need to involve. And also, I think as Oromos, we can't be like a silo, because there are a lot of communities, Hispanic, Latino, or African American, or Asian, or any other immigrant communities that exactly share our values, that exactly in our position. And we really need to build alliance with all types of other communities, and to make sure that we create a platform for young people to get involved and also participate in the process of placemaking, and make sure that our democracy is strong and our communities are represented in a way that we feel that we are included. Otherwise, we just exist, and our values is not really included, or our voice don't really matter unless we organize our people, train our people, run for public office, and make sure that we get there by pushing our agenda forward.
Okay. Thank you, Nasser, so much. I'm going to ask you one last question, and then I will go to Zazu, and then we come back. We're going to conclude it in Afan Oromo. Just I want to make sure we have an Oromo audience. So let me ask you this last
Yep.
question before we change it to Oromo Nasa. You mentioned a lot of interesting things like, election is not like a soccer game. You score and you go home. That's a very interesting question because, like, a lot of times that's what we do. That's what happened to us in 2018. We finally
Yep.
scored. We felt like we did a touchdown. We brought this Opidios or ODP, former ODP, now PP, to office, and look what happened to diaspora Oromos, even in Ethiopian
Right.
politics, diaspora. So
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing to keep in mind is not like election is not something you do during only election year and then you go
Yep.
back because you don't get nothing. That's something to remember and keep in mind. So my last question is specifically for young people who knows or at least educated in the American, whether they are medical or whether they are studied medicine or like people just general, whether engineering, political science, journalism, whatever they or IR they have, whatever degree they have, what do they need to do to make sure, like, if they're interested, how should they run? That's one. Secondly, what is if they're not interested, like, medical people, like medicine people who study medicine, they're not interested, but they're interested to try to change the policy or how the state of Minnesota does certain business with the immigration. Recently, I'll give you an example. I attended one of the meetings at the city of Chicago mayor office. It was a bunch of Africans and about 15 or 20 African countries were there. We talked about it. Like, there is no resource that is being put place specifically for African community. When they talk about African community, usually they kind of blend them with African American. Yes, those are our brothers, but our issues are more related to Hispanic community immigrant rather than African Americans. So, what did the young people, what do we need to do to kind of work either in that policy aspect of it, or what do we need to do? Like, if we have a ambition someday down the road that we want to do something, what is it that we have to do today?
Good. I think here is what like I'm glad that you mentioned different people who study different fields. Politics touches every aspect of our lives. Whether you are driving down the road, whether you are studying medicine, or whether you are living in city that requires a lot of snow plowing during winter, politics touches every aspect of our life. Um, if you study medicine, healthcare is the major issue in the U.S. Healthcare politics is the biggest politics in the U.S. There are so many ways that you can involve in improving healthcare for all people in the United States. Whether that is advocating for for healthcare improvement, or for healthcare coverage for people who are low income, or people who are elderly, or immigrants who are not being connected to the system to get healthcare coverage. If you study engineer, there is always the engineering infrastructure that community needs to know about, whether that is a road construction, whether if you are in business, there is a business politics always going on in like every at the city council, at the state level, at the county, and so you can find anything that you're interested in and turn it into politics, like literally like anything that you are interested in, or anything that you study can be politicized and turned into advocacy around involving public, or pulling community into that field. One example that I can give you is that there are a lot of Oromos or immigrants who come to this country with really good education, but when they come to the U.S., their education turns upside down, which means they need to go through a lot of evaluation and with no resources. And so the challenge is that how do you make a state legislature and the city and the county allocate a resource for that kind of skills to tap for people to if you are educated in, I know medical doctor in the U.S. I know nurses. I know engineer. I know people who studied all types of field in back home, And then when they come here, they really can't do a lot about it because there aren't a lot of resources to allow them to upgrade those education into like a field that is a little bit equivalent to the U.S. And but the state legislature in 2013, I was working for the House. We advocated and got some funding for specifically for people who have medical background. It's in the state of Minnesota to use that funding and upgrade their skills, and that is what we need in our community. I'm just mentioning like a one thing, but I think there are so many issues that we can really like pick and like turn into like a political advocacy and really make sure that our people benefit from this, because the policies either benefit people or hurt people. Any policy that comes out of the state, it has advantage and disadvantage. And it disadvantages those who don't get involved, and it advantages gives benefit for those who get involved. So we have really no luxury of time sitting on the sideline in the U.S. politics and not getting involved. We have no option. This has to be a must for young people, for older people. We need to get involved from anywhere that we can. If you live in the city, call up the city and ask, what do they know? What are they doing about, like, for Oromo people who are living in the city? Are they promoting the Oromo language? Are they understanding the Oromo culture? Are they more inclusive about services? Are they providing inclusive services? Because everywhere you go, you can find, all types of translation services are provided. But if you're a Oromo, well, good luck, because you're not advocating for that. If you're not advocating for that, like in the state of Minnesota, the state that I live in, like you can find the translation in everywhere you go. But in Oromo, it's really very limited. But I'm sure it's the same in every state, because we are not focusing on these issues. We are not advocating for it, which is we have to do it in consistent manner. And that is very important thing that we, as Oromo, we need to like really stand up and advocate for ourselves and learn how the process works as well, because that helps us here and also helps us in back home as well, because we will be able to connect the link between what is happening here, what is happening in back home, and how do we like really promote our value. Like I said, we need to make sure that politicians, elected officials, and state legislatures or decision makers know who we are, know what we value, understand us, and understand our where we're coming from.
Nancy, you touched on to a lot of interesting things that I wanted to ask you. I will take like another hour. Like really, in a state like Minnesota, where we have thousands of people that we don't even receive services in a final level. That's a shame. You know what I'm saying? That that we should have a community college or high school that's teaching these young people a final level. Like we don't have anything. We're just like, we vote. I don't know if we vote, and that's the end of our story. That's just like, I can't believe, like you say, organization, but more than organization, you say it's persistency and consistency, to be consistent. And that is one thing I can talk about it all day, is the fact that we go outside when we're angry, and then that's the last time you hear from our own people. How do we change? And that's the thing we will come back and talk. But for the sake of the time, I want to jump to Zazu. I want to pick up where we left Zazu. I kind of mentioned to you earlier about the opposition party, what they do, and then you also kind of mentioned about lack of strategy and coordination. Okay, a lot of time we talk about like what we don't have. What do we need to do? Especially right now, this 2020 election in Ethiopia, it is so important for Oromo people. And one of my concerns, I was in Ethiopia 3 times in 2019, and I've met with the UN embassy, and we talked about that. I met with the political division part of the embassy, and one of the concerns was that the opposition, all of them, they feel like they're going to win. You know what I'm saying? Everybody is confident they win the election. But are they doing to really win the election? And are we, because as a Oromo, we're going to have people who support PPP, we're going to have people who support other political party. And what I see on social media is very negative attack. But besides social media, like we said earlier, there's really no consistent advocacy happening on the grassroots level, whether it's the opposition party or whether it's just any organization like ours or any other organization located in Ethiopia. What do they need to do to get to really this, strategy? What do they need to do, in your opinion?
Thanks, Sena. I think I have to stress and on what Nasser has said, and then we go from there.
Okay.
The concepts of involvement, and he has mentioned the consistency and involvement. You know what? In Ethiopia, probably the democracy that Americans, the Oromo community in America are experiencing is pretty much different, and it's, for me, it's like a luxury, because the Ethiopian community, particularly the Oromos, were crushed in a very brutal way in the past 100 and over years, because the Oromo people, basically, we had the Gada system, which is purely democratic, but the previous rulers were even crushing and breaking that democratic system. So now we have to get out of that trauma first. How do we come out of that trauma? Our politicians should really get involved. They should go to the grassroots, not like talking to a mass of people in a stadium or whatever, but advocacy groups should be established at community levels. Different elders, we have educated people, we have the youth. Now, what's going on in Ethiopia? Even the politicians are targeting the Kero, the youth, and the elders, the Kares, and there are some groups of community which are being left over, which may not vote for the opposition parties. So what we have to do now is we really need to make sure that we are reaching out to every group of our community. Because now we have said the space is open, but people prefer, or the politicians prefer, talking to people in a stadium. They are not going to their village. They are not going to where people gather. They just want to campaign, and then now they shoot. We mentioned this. Look, EPRDF has convinced our community by saying, or almost by saying, your vote doesn't matter. It doesn't count at all. Our people, they will tell you, okay, I don't think my vote counts. That's what an ordinary person tells you if you go to rural areas. So now we have to tell those people, the left out, the marginalized part of the people, the community, that they should be involved. They should be registered to vote, and then after really evaluating the policies, the strategies of whatever our politicians present to the people. But as you mentioned, Sena, so now we are not organized. We are running out of time as well. So what do we need to do at this time? We have mentioned, you remember, the fact that we have to have a strategy. We should have a purpose.
Yeah.
We should have a unified message, to kind of one message. That's the one aspect of advocacy, is having like unified message to the society. But we have different messages, and then we're really confusing our community, particularly related to election 2020. We're really confusing them. So what we need to do is, within the remaining 4 or 5 months, we have to have established community groups which we can communicate with on a regular basis, regularly. Because people are really eager to vote this time, but they really don't know how to vote, because we say democracy is very infant there, and the Prosperity Party, are now going after our opposition parties and then trying to confuse the community again. So we really have to make sure that we have introduced our candidates, representatives, and with details of their profiles, like their academic status, their political involvement, their policies, strategies, the plans they have on education, on economic development, and whatever. So this is what we have to do, even the opposition politicians or the government has to do. After all, if it benefits the society, it doesn't matter which party goes and convinces them.